They called me an unnecessary expense. 6 weeks later, they lost $12 million in one afternoon. I didn't sabotage anything, I just cut the lifeline I had created for them. My name is Natalie Brenner. For 12 years, I've been the Chief Integration Engineer at Lintex Systems, a SaaS company that provides electronic contract management platforms for large enterprises. I joined when we were just a scrappy startup operating out of a converted warehouse in Bloomington, Indiana, with dreams bigger than our server capacity. Back then, we were 7 people working around the clock, fueled by cheap coffee and expensive ambition. Now, we're a company of over 200 employees with offices in 3 states and clients across the country. Or at least, I was the chief integration engineer until last month. I built Lintex's crown jewel, a system called Smart Sync. If you've never worked in enterprise contract management, you might not understand just how complex it is to manage thousands of legal agreements across dozens of jurisdictions, each with their own regulations, renewal requirements, and compliance standards. Smart Sync was my solution to this problem, an intelligent engine that monitored contract life cycles, triggered renewals at precisely the right moments, and ensured legal compliance across multiple jurisdictions. The system wasn't just important, it was vital. Smart Sync managed over 8,000 active contracts, with a combined annual value exceeding $500 million. For 10 years, it ran without a single major disruption or lawsuit. Our clients loved it because it was reliable, adaptable, and secure. The legal team loved it because it kept us out of court. And the executive team loved it because it kept revenue flowing predictably quarter after quarter. I wasn't just the architect of Smart Sync. I was its caretaker. I knew every line of code, every API connection, every database relationship. I had built most of it myself and carefully selected the team that helped maintain it. We were a well-oiled machine until Jared Halbrook arrived. Jared was the CEO's son, fresh out of business school with an MBA and a point to prove. His mother, Elaine Halbrook, had founded Lintex and grown it from nothing to a respected industry player. She appointed Jared as Executive Vice President of Strategy, a title that seemed designed to give him authority without specific responsibilities. From day one, it was clear that Jared saw himself as the company's future leader and visionary. I first met Jared during a company-wide meeting where he was introduced. He wore an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and spoke with the practiced confidence of someone who had never really been challenged. After the meeting, he stopped by my desk. "So you're the one who built the legacy system," he said, not quite making it a question. "If by legacy system you mean Smart Sync, then yes," I replied, already feeling defensive. "I designed and built most of it, though I've had help maintaining and expanding it over the years." He nodded, looking past me at my monitors where several terminal windows displayed log outputs. "Interesting. Very traditional. I've been reading about the latest AI-driven contract management systems. Have you looked into those at all?" And that was how it began. Not with outright dismissal, but with the implication that what I had built was outdated, a relic from a less sophisticated era. In the weeks that followed, Jared launched what he called the Next Generation Initiative. He brought in a team of interns, bright-eyed computer science students from his alma mater, and set them up in a glass-walled conference room that became known as the Innovation Lab. At first, I tried to engage. I offered to walk the interns through Smart Sync's architecture, to explain the nuances and complexities that had been refined over a decade of real-world use. But Jared intercepted my emails, saying they needed fresh perspectives unbiased by legacy thinking. Then I noticed I was being excluded from strategy meetings that I'd always attended before. My access to certain development environments was revoked for security purposes during the transition phase. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday in April. I was called into a meeting with Jared and Melissa from HR. The moment I saw Melissa's carefully neutral expression, I knew what was coming. "Natalie," Jared began, leaning forward with practiced empathy, "as part of our strategic restructuring, we're streamlining our engineering division to better align with future needs." I just stared at him, refusing to make this easy. "Your position is being eliminated," he continued. The legacy system you've maintained is being phased out in favor of our new AI-driven platform. We're offering a generous severance package, including 3 months' salary and extended benefits. Melissa slid a folder across the table. We've prepared all the documentation. We'll need you to sign the non-disparagement agreement. Of course. I opened the folder and scanned the first page. The severance was indeed generous, more than required by our employment contracts. They were paying for my silence. When? I asked. Effective immediately, Jared replied. We'll have it assist you in gathering your personal belongings. For security reasons, your system access has already been deactivated. I closed the folder without signing anything. I'll review this with my attorney. Jared's smile tightened slightly. Of course, we'd appreciate having everything finalized by the end of the week. I stood up and walked out without another word. At my desk, a security guard and an IT specialist were already waiting. The security guard, a man named Dave, who I'd chatted with nearly every morning for 5 years, couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry about this, Natalie, he mumbled. Not your fault, Dave, I replied, pulling out my personal laptop bag. I emptied my desk methodically, placing 12 years of accumulated memories into a cardboard box. Family photos, a collection of conference badges, a small rubber duck that had sat on my monitor for years, my companion during countless debugging sessions. The IT specialist watched nervously as I gathered my belongings, probably expecting some dramatic outburst or sabotage attempt. But I didn't need to sabotage anything. I knew what would happen without my intervention. You see, there was something that Jared, in all his MBA wisdom, had failed to understand. SmartSync wasn't just a software system, it was an ecosystem. It was built on relationships, technical, legal, and personal, and many of those relationships were connected to me personally. The most critical of these were the API integration contracts with 12 of our largest enterprise clients. These weren't standard service agreements. They were custom contracts that named me specifically as the responsible technical contact. This was unusual, but these particular clients, conservative financial institutions, and government contractors, had insisted on having a named, accountable person responsible for their integrations. Together, these contracts were worth approximately $12 million in annual recurring revenue. As I walked out of the Lintech offices, for what I thought would be the last time, I made 3 calls from my car. The first was to my attorney, to review the severance package. The second was to my former mentor, now a partner at a consulting firm, to discreetly explore job opportunities. And the third was to download and secure all my personal notes, documentation, and intellectual property that I had created during my time at Lintech. Let me be clear, I didn't take anything that belonged to the company. The core code of SmartSync was Lintech's property, created under work-for-hire provisions in my employment contract, but my personal notes, my process documentation, my troubleshooting guides, and especially my complex regulatory compliance matrices for contract renewals across different states, those were mine. I had created them on my own time, as tools to help me do my job better. They weren't company property, and they weren't stored on company servers. Over the next 2 weeks, I took a much-needed vacation. I spent time with my family, caught up on reading, and deliberately avoided checking my work email or professional social media. But I couldn't completely disconnect. Too many industry colleagues knew me, and word travels fast in tech circles. That's how I heard about the problems starting to emerge at Lintech. First, it was just rumors, clients experiencing unusual delays in contract processing. Then more concrete reports, a major banking client in Texas had filed a complaint because their contracts had auto-renewed on the wrong date, potentially violating state regulations. Then the bigger news, several enterprise clients had issued formal notices of termination. I wasn't surprised. SmartSync handled thousands of intricate scheduling details across multiple jurisdictions. It knew exactly when to trigger renewal notices based on complex criteria including state laws, client preferences, and contractual terms. The system I'd built looked simple on the surface but contained a decade of accumulated edge cases and exception handling. And now it was failing, because the team that had replaced me didn't understand its complexity. 3 weeks after my departure, my phone rang with a number I recognized. It was Marlon Griggs, Lintech's longtime CFO, and the only executive who had consistently advocated for the engineering team over the years. "Natalie," he said when I answered, his voice tight with stress. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Marlon," I replied neutrally. "Enjoying some time off." He sighed heavily. "I'm glad to hear it. Listen, I'm calling because, well, we're having some issues with SmartSync. Several major clients are threatening to terminate their contracts due to compliance concerns." "That's unfortunate," I said, deliberately noncommittal. "Natalie," Marlon's voice dropped lower. "It's bad, really bad. The new system isn't ready, and the transition team can't figure out why certain contracts are failing to process correctly. We've got clients threatening legal action, and our stock price has dropped 15% in the last week." I waited, saying nothing. "We need your help," he finally admitted. "The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss the situation, and I've convinced them that bringing you back as a consultant is the fastest way to stabilize things." Now it was my turn to sigh. "Marlon, I was told my position was eliminated, that my expertise was no longer needed, that the legacy system I built was being replaced by an exciting new AI solution." "I know. And that was a mistake," Marlon said quickly. "Look, I was against this whole restructuring from the beginning, but I was overruled. Now everyone can see it was premature at best, catastrophic at worst." "And Jared?" Marlon hesitated. "He's still here. He's the CEO's son, Natalie, but his influence has been curtailed somewhat by recent events. I considered my options. I could refuse, let Lintech suffer the consequences of their decision, and move on to one of the several opportunities already emerging, or I could go back, fix the problems, and potentially save the jobs of many former colleagues who weren't responsible for the decision to let me go. But if I did go back, it would be on my terms. "I'll help," I said finally, "but not as an employee, as an independent consultant, with a 6-month contract at 4 times my previous salary." I heard Marlon's sharp intake of breath but pressed on before he could respond. "I'll need complete autonomy to resolve the issues, without interference from Jared or anyone else, and I'll retain ownership of any new code or systems I develop to fix the problems." There was a long pause. "I'll take your terms to the board," Marlon said eventually, "but given the circumstances, I think they'll agree." They did agree, all of it, without negotiation. That told me everything I needed to know about how desperate the situation had become. The next morning, I walked back into Lintech's offices, not as a dismissed employee, but as a highly paid consultant with a very specific mission. The atmosphere was noticeably tense, people whispered in corners, and the usual buzz of productive activity was subdued. Dave, the security guard, greeted me with a relieved smile and a visitor badge, which felt strange after 12 years of being an employee. Marlon met me in the lobby and escorted me to a conference room where a team was waiting. To my surprise, Elaine Halbrook, the CEO and Jared's mother, was among them. Jared himself sat at the far end of the table, his expression carefully neutral. "Natalie," Elaine stood and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming back to help us through this situation." I shook her hand. "I'm here to solve a technical problem," I said. "Let's focus on that." For the next hour, the team briefed me on the extent of the issues. It was worse than I had imagined. Not only were contracts failing to renew correctly, but the system was also generating erroneous compliance reports, miscalculating fees, and in some cases, failing to capture electronic signatures properly. The 12 enterprise clients with whom I had personal API integration contracts were threatening immediate termination, which would trigger a cascade of financial penalties and lost revenue. "What about the new system?" I asked, looking directly at Jared. "The AI-driven solution that was supposed to replace SmartSync." Jared shifted uncomfortably. "It's still in development. There were unforeseen complexities in replicating certain features." "Meaning it doesn't work," I translated flatly. "May I see what's been built so far?" A young woman, one of the interns, I assumed, pulled up a presentation on the room's main display. What I saw was essentially a prototype, A flashy front end with impressive visualizations, but virtually no back-end complexity. It could handle basic contract storage and retrieval, but none of the sophisticated compliance checking, automated renewals, or multi-jurisdictional rule set management that made SmartSync valuable. "This is a demo," I said, "not a product." "We underestimated the complexity of the existing system," the intern admitted, looking embarrassed. I turned to Elaine. "I need a team of engineers who actually worked on SmartSync, access to all system logs for the past month, and a direct line to the technical contacts at the affected clients, and I need it all within the hour." Elaine nodded. "You'll have everything you need." As people scrambled to fulfill my requests, Jared approached me cautiously. "Natalie, I want to say—" I cut him off. "Save it. I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here to prevent this company from losing millions in revenue and possibly facing lawsuits. We can discuss the how and why after I've fixed the immediate problems." He looked taken aback but nodded and stepped away. For the next 72 hours, I barely left the office. The problems were extensive but not unfixable. The core of SmartSync was still intact, but critical supporting systems had been modified by people who didn't understand their function. Key scheduled tasks had been disabled as redundant. Regulatory compliance matrices had been simplified, removing essential nuance, and most critically, the personal access tokens that authenticated my API integrations with those 12 key enterprise clients had expired without renewal. I worked methodically, restoring functionality piece by piece. I had my personal notes and documentation, which proved invaluable in reconstructing the system's intended behavior. 3 engineers who had worked under me before my departure joined the effort, relieved to have clear direction again. By the end of the 3rd day, we had stabilized the most critical functions. Contracts were once again renewing correctly. Compliance checks were accurate, and we had established emergency communication channels with the affected clients to address their concerns directly. On the morning of the 4th day, I called a meeting with the entire technical team, including Jared and the interns. It was time for some education. "Today," I announced to the assembled group, "I'm going to explain how SmartSync actually works and why it was designed the way it was." For the next 3 hours, I walked them through the system's architecture, from the high-level components down to the specific algorithms that handled regulatory compliance across different jurisdictions. I explained the historical context of certain design decisions, the regulatory changes that had shaped various features, and the intricate dance of dependencies that kept everything functioning smoothly. As I spoke, I could see the dawning comprehension on the faces of the interns. What they had dismissed as legacy code was actually a sophisticated system built to solve real, complex problems that they hadn't even recognized existed. Jared, to his credit, paid close attention and asked several surprisingly insightful questions. "The problem wasn't that SmartSync is outdated," I concluded. "The problem was that its complexity was invisible because it worked so well. You saw the clean, simple interface and assumed the underlying system must be equally simple. That's like looking at the surface of the ocean and failing to account for its depth." After the presentation, Elaine asked to speak with me privately. We moved to her office, a space I had visited only a handful of times during my years at Lintech. "That was illuminating," she said, settling behind her desk. "I've always known SmartSync was important, but I never fully understood its sophistication until today." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "Natalie, I want to apologize personally for how things were handled. The decision to let you go was made without my direct involvement. I was in Europe negotiating our international expansion, but as CEO, the responsibility ultimately rests with me." "Thank you," I said simply. "I'd like to offer you a new position," she continued. "Chief Technology Officer, reporting directly to me, complete autonomy over the technical direction of the company, with a substantial equity package." I hadn't expected this. The offer was generous, potentially life-changing from a financial perspective, but I had already begun to imagine a different future for myself. "I appreciate the offer, Elaine, but I'm not interested in returning as an employee." She looked surprised. May I ask why, if it's about compensation? I'm sure we can. It's not about money, I interrupted. It's about respect and understanding. What happened to me wasn't just a personnel decision. It was symptomatic of a deeper problem in how this company values technical expertise. Jared was able to dismiss me and my work because the organization didn't have sufficient checks and balances in place to prevent ill-informed technical decisions. Elaine leaned back, considering my words. What would you suggest, then? I'm willing to continue as a strategic consultant, helping to implement what I'm calling a technical respect culture. That means comprehensive documentation, fair evaluation of technical contributions, and ensuring that technical decisions are made based on merit, not personal relationships or hierarchy. And Jared, she asked carefully. Jared has potential, I admitted. He asks good questions when he's listening rather than trying to prove himself, but he needs to learn how technology actually works in practice, not just in theory. I'd recommend he spend 6 months working directly with the engineering team, not managing them, but learning from them. Elaine was quiet for a long moment. You've given me a lot to think about, she finally said. I'll consider your suggestions. Over the next few weeks, I continued to work with the Lintech team to fully restore SmartSync and improve its documentation. I held regular sessions to explain different aspects of the system, ensuring that knowledge was distributed rather than concentrated. I worked directly with the 12 enterprise clients to rebuild trust and renew their integration contracts, this time with proper company-level agreements rather than ones tied to me personally. The interns, once they understood what they were actually working with, proved to be talented and eager to learn. We incorporated some of their AI innovations into SmartSync, where they added genuine value, creating a hybrid system that combined the reliability of the original with new capabilities. As for Jared, he surprised me. After our initial confrontation, he began to show up at technical meetings not to direct, but to observe. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. When he finally approached me again, it was with a humility I hadn't expected. I made a massive mistake, he said without preamble. I evaluated SmartSync based on its age and appearance rather than its functionality. I assumed that newer automatically meant better. That's a common mistake in technology, I replied, especially for people coming from business schools, where case studies rarely capture the true complexity of technical systems. I've been thinking about what you said, about understanding how technology works in practice. He continued, I'd like to learn, if you're willing to teach me. I considered him for a moment. I'm not here to be your personal tutor, Jared, but if you're genuinely interested in understanding, I'll point you in the right direction. And so I did. I recommended books, online courses, and specific projects within Lintech where he could gain practical experience. To his credit, he tackled them all with determination. As my consulting contract neared its halfway point, Elaine called me into her office again. This time, Marlon was there too. We've been implementing your recommendations, she said. Comprehensive documentation protocols, technical review boards for major decisions, regular knowledge-sharing sessions. The engineering team morale has improved significantly. I've noticed, I said. It was true the atmosphere at Lintech had transformed from the tense, uncertain environment I'd returned to into something much more positive and productive. We've also restructured Jared's role, Marlon added. He's now working as a project coordinator under the engineering director, learning the business from the ground up. Good, I nodded. That's where he'll gain the most valuable insights. Natalie, Elaine leaned forward. We'd like to extend your consulting contract for another year, with an option for renewal after that. The board has unanimously approved it. I had expected this and had already made my decision. I'll stay on as a consultant through the end of my current contract to ensure a smooth transition, but after that, I'll be moving on to new projects. Both Elaine and Marlon looked disappointed but not surprised. May I ask what you're planning next? Marlon inquired. I'm starting my own consulting firm, I revealed, focusing on helping companies understand and manage complex technical systems. I've already had several inquiries from organizations facing similar challenges to what Lintech experienced. Elaine smiled ruefully. Including some of our competitors, I imagine. I won't be sharing any proprietary information, I assured her. But yes, the interest has come from across the industry. What happened here isn't unique, unfortunately. Well, we can't stop you, Elaine said. But we would like to be your first client, even after the current contract ends. We'd value your periodic reviews and guidance. We negotiated terms for an ongoing but limited engagement, one that would allow me to pursue my new venture while still helping Lintech maintain its technical excellence. On my last day as a full-time consultant, the engineering team organized a small celebration. There was cake, champagne, and a card signed by everyone, including Jared, who had written a surprisingly heartfelt note about the lessons he'd learned. As I packed up my consultant workspace, which ironically was just 2 desks away from my old employee desk, Elaine stopped by. "I still wish you were staying," she said. "Sometimes the best thing someone can do for an organization is to leave it better than they found it," I replied. SmartSync is now properly documented. The team understands how it works, and there are processes in place to prevent similar issues in the future. "And the business is secure," Elaine added. "All 12 of those enterprise contracts have been renewed, with improved terms. The stock price has recovered, and we're actually ahead of our quarterly projections." I smiled. Then my work here is done. As I walked out of the Lintech offices for the second time, the difference couldn't have been more stark. The first time, I had left under a cloud, escorted by security, carrying a box of personal items and a severance package designed to buy my silence. This time, I left on my own terms, with a profitable consulting contract completed, future work secured, and a new business venture ahead of me. I drove home that evening feeling not bitter but vindicated, not because Lintech had suffered, though they certainly had, but because in the end, they had recognized the value of what I had built and the expertise I brought to the table. They had learned, painfully but effectively, that technical systems aren't just code. They're the accumulation of knowledge, experience, and careful attention to detail. Before I left, I added one final note to the now extensive SmartSync documentation. When code looks messy, ask why before you change it. It was a simple lesson, but one that had cost Lintech $12 million to learn. As for me, I was already looking forward to my next challenge, helping other companies avoid making the same expensive mistake.